try and punch their ticket to the top 8. There on the left side, it is Francesco Giorgio playing Azuri Switchblade, taking on Michael Jaszczur playing Oldhim Grandfather Eternity. Francesco trying to be the dark horse in this top 8, make a home for Azuri in one of her first large tournaments out. Michael trying to add to the legend of Oldhim. Maybe get Oldhim some critical living legend points on that march to actually hitting living legend status. It's possible in this tournament.
So some equipment pieces to point out here. We do have the Spider's Bite Scale Peeler, Van Brace of Determination, the tech piece against this Crown of Seeds. And this Azuri deck is a little bit different than I think the one that we cast previously. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Brian?
Yeah, it's leans more aggressive. It is very much in line with sort of that Sam Dando school of Azuri. There's things like looking for a scrap, a little bit more ways to inject a pinch of go wide into the deck. But ultimately the same value proposition being presented by these Azuris. Very, very challenging to play against, very grindy. Again, it's hard to imagine Francesco going to this tournament and saying, man, I sure hope I don't play any Oldhams. It just doesn't seem like a winning proposition to me, and it doesn't seem like a way you can actually get to a 10-3 record. So I expect Francesco has played this matchup, believes in his plan. I'm not saying he's saying it's a good matchup, because it is hard to play Azuri into Oldham, but I think he knows what he's doing here, and I think he knows what his goals are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's actually, if Francesco did look at the metagame and was like, okay, I have a positive matchup into Lexi, and my Oldham matchup is going to be tough, maybe I'm around that 40%. I think that's a great pick, to be honest. You do draw Oldhim and you're winning in, but still you've been very well positioned against the rest of the field. I do agree with you, though. I do think that Francesco has a game plan for this Oldhim deck. Does seem to be a bit more of an aggressive-oriented Oldhim deck, because not only do we see Rouse the Ancients and Spinal Crush pitched, but this is a Zealous Belting played out.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is, a concession to the Azuri matchup, if this is just how Michael plays Oldham potentially. This is maybe the first Zealous Belting I've seen all day.
Yeah, so what I want people to pay attention to on the side of Michael here is going to be that Tunic counter. Once it ticks up to 3, you're going to look for 2-cost cards to be pummeled in addition to it, or for Michael to play 2 cards, one in the form of a 4-cost card that has 8 damage, and only pitch 1 blue, using that Tunic resource to pay for that cost. One of the highest value things Oldhim can do. But like I said, Michael does have the pummels in his list, so that's also going to be a narrative here.
Yeah, looking through Michael's list, curiously, one pummel, one red pummel here. So it is leaning a little bit aggressive in terms of things like Zealous Belting, Rouse the Ancients. Not completely in on that pummel plan, though.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the correct decision. I think that pummel is a good card, but ultimately I would rather do 2 for 8 over and over and over again.
Yeah, I have another thing I would like to point out in this matchup. A Nothos.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like just skipping out on the shield. Yeah, willing to go the beatdown route. And that's interesting, because this is a more aggressive Azuri deck, as we said. So is there going to be a window where Francesco can actually take advantage of the fact that this Oldhim isn't super set up to play defense? I think it's more of like a mid-range Azuri. That plays in your favor. You do have a very clear way to go ahead and get into this game now. Let's see if Francesco can go ahead and put together the pieces, make Azuri look like a real threat.
Yep, early Crown of Providence from Francesco here is able to cycle off of it.
Michael just going to draw back up here. Iron Rot legs down there in the leg spot.
I believe those are the Iron Hide ones, the one that you pay.
Thank you, Iron Hide, they are. I always call, I know the difference between Iron Hide and Iron Rot, but for some reason I always call Iron Hides Iron Rots. I don't know what's wrong with me. Spend too much time in the dumpster with my dragons.
Yeah, but when we did talk about the Azuri being in deep water against the Oldhim, I think we were more referring to the somewhat defensive, value-orientated Oldhim decks. I mean, something that's more aggressive, maybe pulling out the Anothos here. But you're right, that could favor Francesco more than a traditional Oldhim list that we've seen.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I've played a lot of Azuri, frankly. I'm more than most people, I think, at this point. But it's so weird how unique all of these Azuri lists are. I certainly have not played games with Francesco's list, and maybe he's found a window here to go ahead and insert, his version of Azuri into this metagame. Maybe it's an Oldhim killer. Maybe Francesco has cracked the code. It is going to be Shakedown here. That's a good way to do some damage to an Oldhim. Let's see if there's some additional defense reacts that maybe Michael could use to go ahead and predict.
What sort of defense reacts does Michael have in his deck, just so we can keep track of them?
Yeah, we're looking at some staunch responses, 2 red staunch responses. We do, of course, have Sink Belows, Oasis Respite present.
Looks like we do connect with Shakedown here. Looks like Terra Sunder will be the card that will be banished.
They're gonna be pretty limiting as to what Michael can do on this next turn here. Michael's deck's such an interesting mix of cards. There is a one-off healing bomb in the deck. It's sort of flirting with the idea of being a life-gaining type Oldhim. There's 3 sigils, so these very mixed elements of aggression and defense present, and I assume the configuration here for Michael is to present the more aggressive configuration.
At least in the first few turns of the games, it does seem like that is the angle that we are going on. But Shakedown connecting early, pretty big for Francesco.
Spreading Plague going to be used on defense here.
Is there any chance that Michael has potentially sided out some of these defense reactions?
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, look, there's some very strange signs about Michael's deck, some very unorthodox things going on. I don't want to make any assumptions as to how he's intending to play this matchup. And frankly, I'm not sure how much most players in this field practice against Uzuri, and they would be correct. There were only 6 Uzuris in the entire tournament, I believe, on day 1. So
we see our first sink below, and that's going to be an incredible conversion rate to top 8 if Francesco does make it. With that only that few showing up. But yeah, I would assume by this point in the tournament, Michael does have an idea of at least what archetype of Uzuri Francesco is on, so likely will have correctly pre-boarded into it. I'm sure Francisco is pretty popular at the top tables, being the only Uzuri.
Yep. And just some clean, good old-fashioned value here. A little bit of Command and Conquer, some fine generics coming through, and Light and Strike, Command and Conquer. Sort of the 3 original kings of Flesh and Blood, Art of War, Command and Conquer, Light and Strike. Good to see them still out there doing work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, not much Art of War this weekend.
A little bit in Lexi. Some people brought it, but I know there was definitely a debate on whether it actually should be in the list or not.
Just going to be an Othos turn here from Michael. Small block with the Surgical Extraction from Francesco. Going to start things off with that Spider's Bite, pitching Surgical Extraction. Cut down to size, an interesting big threat here from Francesco. I've seen some Uzuris utilize that quite well. Really, really strong against your opponents that are just trying to go ahead, ignore what you're doing, play those big 5-6 card hands. Cut down to size demands an answer in those scenarios. Not sure exactly what you're looking for against Oldhim, but it is present. Oh, okay, yeah, cut down to size. Why not? Gonna force Michael to play. And look, I say it's not exactly what you're looking for against Oldhim, but if the Oldhim's aggressive, that can change very quickly. Like, this might be a turn where Michael was actually trying to set up to play multiple attacks on a turn, and if you've played cut down to size, you've invalidated that plan. You don't have the option of ignoring this card.
Yeah, I think, even this far into the game, I'm still trying to orient myself on what strategy Michael is on in terms of like his larger game plan to try to win this game.
Yeah, I want to mention 3 red pummels available to Francesco. So does have that deceptive ability to push a bunch of damage out of nowhere. Good to see Looking for a Scrap make its way to Francesco's list. I do think that is a card that is destined to do some work in constructing environments. And it looks like we went ahead and caught a card with this cut down to size. Despite there being a block, I believe that was a card perhaps drawn off the Crown of Seeds with a Tunic activation. So find a window to go ahead and get an extra card, and maybe a bit of a misstep there from Michael.
So is this a red Thunderquake? If it is, I do believe this is the classic 2-card 10.
Yeah, it's a little foiled, and we're seeing a bit of a shake of a head from Michael there. I do think we may have seen a misstep in regards to that cut down to size on that turn. A nice little block here from Francesco. Mid-range, looking to prevent some damage, preserve an offensive hand. That's what these Uzuris want to do.
Hey, don't see a lot of those type of decks in Flesh and Blood anymore, to be honest. So it's pretty refreshing to see these Uzuri decks come out. Employ that game plan.
I actually heard that when the devs were creating Uzuri, one of the things they really wanted to achieve was to sort of bring back this mid-rangey field, Flesh and Blood. Little Bird told me that was a huge part of the goals with Uzuri. I'd say mission accomplished. Great job, devs. Sure, designers too. Everyone. Thanks, Brendan.
You're welcome.
My arm's a little sore from patting myself on the back, so I'm going to take a stretch here, hand it over to Brendan for a bit.
So Infect here for Francesco. Michael sort of in the tank on, what to do about it, what the potential swap could be. I mean, I think the way this match goes, it seems like you can't just consistently overcommit blocks to these kind of threats, right?
Yeah, and when you do that, Missouri shifts and tries to fatigue you. That's just the way they play. So I do think you have to be a little careful. You have to choose your spots. You have to think about, what does my own output look like? You have to do the dance. You have to play the game. That's what we're going to be doing here in Michael's seat. If you're Michael, you need to maybe shake off that previous misstep. Get your head back in the game. I'm sure Michael, having made it this far, will have no trouble doing so. Seems calm, collected, focused, moisturized, covered in ice, in his lane, flourishing.
Okay, so 3-card hand for Michael here, just considering what the attack will be. Like we do see Autumn's Touch blue pitched and just going to be an Anothos. Not great.
Pretty low output turn. You're certainly pleased to see that if you're in Francesco's seat.
Yeah, very unlikely to pummel this Anothos, so it's going to be a pseudo IP penalty for Michael here, most likely.
Yeah, Flesh and Blood, you're always incentivized to use as many of your cards offensively as you can. That's just efficient. You want to get the most out of your hands.
Yeah, leaving with a redundant card in hand is, I think, one of the most devastating things you can do in Flesh and Blood at a tournament like the Pro Tour. But some classes are not able to utilize them correctly. Like when Francesco presents the 0 for 3, it's hard to sort of predict what the rest of his turn will look like with the Azuri Banish sort of looming. We do see Sneak Attack blocking this Anothos.
Yeah, interesting block here. Red Sneak Attack, committed defense.
Does that tell us anything about the context of Francesco's hand, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of your best pieces of offensive output. And what that tells me is that maybe there's something even better, something like a shakedown, some other way to disrupt your opponent. Because Sneak Attack is just raw damage. And ultimately, it is important as the Azuri that you annoy your opponent, you disrupt your opponent. So I could say maybe there's just a better option than the Sneak Attack here for Francesco. Going to leak some damage through.
Oh, we are going to heave Pulverize. Very nice.
Yeah, so that does cover up that IP penalty you talked about, able to get full efficiency out of the hand. And this could be a big turn for Michael. And what's critical here, if you're Francesco, find some way to disrupt this turn. Try your absolute damnedest to go ahead and keep that Pulverize in hand. Something like Shakedown plus Pummel could be an absolute world beater here for Francesco.
Unfortunately, Tunic only on 2 for Francesco, but a nice little interaction with Pummel and Chronoseeds is that because Pulverize is face up, you cannot actually Chronoseed it away. So if you're able to disrupt your opponent's hand, they can get that locked in their arsenal.
Yeah, a little bit more predictability here. It looks like it's going to be looking for a scrap is the play from Francesco. So that's just 4 raw damage. Not exactly what we're looking for. There are still cards left in hand.
It's pretty good though. You can really make Michael pay in terms of life for wanting to keep cards in hand to cast this Pulverize.
Sure, that makes sense. Michael is just going to go ahead and commit a card to defense and protect some of that life total. So now, should you have the disruptive effect, really, really strong possibility of keeping Michael off that Pulverize. Looks like it is going to be a pitch here into a Vambrace activation.
Interesting.
Okay. What do you make of that Vambrace?
That's what I was about to ask you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so is it Codex of Frailty, asymmetry?
Yep, it's about emptying hand.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense. 2 resources floating, Command and Conquer going to work to clean up that Pulverize. Very nice. I wonder about Command and Conquer.
Is he doing him a favor? Yeah.
Well, I wonder about Command and Conquer versus something like, say, Shakedown.
Yeah,
and
that's
just trying to take the resources out of hand. Shakedown naming blue. Is that enough? Like, we know Michael has 3 cards in hand, so there is some possibility you Shakedown naming blue, and then you get Pulverized. That's a really bad state to be in.
I mean, if Michael has 3 other reds in hand, he did block with a red. I mean, you would be doing him a favor with this Command and Conquer, right?
You would, and let's see what the block is here from Michael. I think there's a good possibility maybe we just see a 1-card block here and we let that Pulverize go and find some other attack. Really interesting spot here for sure.
Ponder token on the side of Francisco, so we'll have the option to draw a card and potentially Arsenal after this, despite the empty hand.
Yeah, Pulverize, of course, coming through with a 10 cost, but there is going to be a tunic on the next turn. So double blue would be enough in this case to fire off. Trying to make out the pitch stripes on those cards. I just want to know about the efficiency of sneak attack there.
Yeah, it's buckling blow, so one of them is definitely blue, which is interesting because we're
Yeah.
not going to be casting as pulverized. These seismic surge tokens will expire. That is, that's what happens. So
That's dangerous,
I
man.
think this
That's real dangerous.
wow, this is really okay. I'm super interested to see what the card in Michael's hand is here.
That frailty is going to go off.
It's just drawing up.
Interesting. A very interesting line taken by Michael here, because now if Francesco could find another disruptive turn, I think Michael's in a spot of trouble. You need to get that arsenal cleared. Losing access to your crown of seeds is a large problem. Granted, there is a Van Brace on the other side, and that does matter. That's a very, very effective counter to crown, but it demands resources.
Hey, you're losing more than your crown of seeds. You also lose your arsenal. I mean, there's a huge
Great
opportunity
point,
cost to this if you're keeping it in arsenal for a while. Yeah, I mean, without the seismic search tokens, this thing is really hard to cast, and you can really punish Michael by doing a lot of damage because he might need to keep his entire hand to cast the card. I mean, this could be a 10 damage swing for Francesco, just because Michael can't afford the economy of actually committing a card to block.
Yeah, there's not a ton of might here, honestly. Like, it basically, you have to have 3 blues plus tunic if you're not going to keep your entire hand. So it does seem very likely that Michael just has to accept this if he wants to play that pulverize, if he wants to clear arsenal. That's a scary spot to be in against Azuri, especially if we find some disruption here. A huge threat looming.
100% correct. Like, if we find some disruption, it is devastating. Maybe one of those pummels coming through.
Concealed Blade going to be played on this backstab. A little bit of a pump effect, pushing through some extra damage. Yeah, I'm not sure this is exactly what Francesco was looking for in this spot. Just going to go ahead, seemingly take his own IP penalty here.
Yeah, I think Azuri sometimes, one of those heroes that does have a bit of a harder time utilizing a 5-card hand.
Yeah, not a lot of output there from Francesco.
Oh, what is this? Okay, so we are keeping the pulverized
Yeah.
in. I mean, could we have 3 blues plus the tunic here? So 3 blues left in hand. No, because he's just gonna have 2 cards. I mean, yeah, this pulverized is staying in arsenal.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen this play out a few times in the history of playing Flesh and Blood, and usually it doesn't go super well.
It usually does not. But I will say this. Michael is built in a different fashion. This is an aggressive Oldham deck. He's trying to maybe put together these go wide, these high damage turns. So I don't think this is necessarily a completely scuffed game. I think there's a very real possibility that Michael just values that pulverize so highly, thinks it's so critical that you present 14 on a given turn, that this is how he's got to play this game. He has to preserve that pulverize.
I feel like an Oldham finally pulverizes you, as most of these decks. I mean, you just kind of toss the hand, right? Like the pulverize hit effect is pretty bad, so you're just incentivized to block when something like pulverize doesn't
an absolute mess of reds in that hand. It was
okay,
three red cards.
A bit unlucky, right? So even though we have tunic on 3, this pulverize is hard to cast. I mean, you do have to get the 3 blues or some concoction. I don't know if that's the word. Assortment of cards that can actually reach these 10 resources. Looks like Michael has whiffed on that this turn. Thus, we see this sort of zealous belting into Anathos.
Yeah, a pretty mild turn. And with Francesco choosing not to block here, I expect far more fireworks than we saw in the last turn. There should be some output here from Francesco. And as long as that pulverize is looming, offensive output is the name of the game for Francesco.
You'd hope. I mean, this is a very exploitable board state for Francesco. If I was Francesco, the last thing I would do in this game is cast another Command and Conquer.
Yeah, here is a leave no witnesses. So as of right now, this is just a single attack. There are those Black Tech Whispers, should this hit, potentially as a way to go wide. And I think that is another part of Michael's problem. I will say, though, leave no witnesses does have the potential to clear that arsenal again. And sure, it's nice to get a guaranteed red for leave no witnesses. I think getting those silvers will be welcome. But is it a bit of an out for Michael to a looming pulverized problem?
Yeah, really interesting sort of sequence of turns here with this dance of pulverize in the arsenal here. No more seismic surge tokens to discount it. And Crown of Seeds effectively turned off as well.
I will say, you get a choice with leave no witnesses. Text is when this hits a hero, banish the top card of their deck and up to 1 card in their arsenal. could be that Francesco can hit and just be like, nah, keep that.
I think it depends if Michael blocks or doesn't block. If Michael's willing to take a lot of damage, it kind of telegraphs that maybe he has the blues to finally cast the pulverize, and then you would go ahead and banish it.
Yeah, and it looks like it is going to hit. And it's just going to be draw back up for Francesco. So
Cleared the pulverize, though.
yeah, cleared the pulverize, but again, a pretty medium turn of output.
I mean, you would. So, looking at that board state for the past few turns, you would have expected Francesco to exploit that in terms of making Michael take a lot of damage to finally get that out of his arsenal, or just put Michael in a situation via disruption effects where he just never can cast either your pummeling stuff, your shakedowning, etc. But it didn't go like that at all. We went with kind of this sort of, 1 to 2 card sort of playback, and then we actually cleared the arsenal. I think that, honestly, I think Michael's in a better situation now for it.
I'm going to be honest, this is a weird-ass game, Brennan. I'm kind of baffled at how this game is going thus far, and there you see some sort of situational cards that are
Pummel
telling me...
Anathos, too. That's the only pummel in the deck as well.
Yep, that one pummel now being used to push damage. You see some of maybe the issue that was going on. Spreading Plague, one of the cards in hand, not very good at offensive output.
Yeah, the Pummel Anathos is interesting as well because the Tunic is on 3, which means we could use a 2-cost Guardian attack and as well, something like a Zealous Belting, and then pop off the counter on Tunic, 1 blue, or pummeling Zealous Belting. But doesn't seem to be the situation.
Time to pitch a Plague Hive here. Going to go ahead, take a roll. It is going to give...
Frailty.
Frailty, not exactly what you're looking for against an Oldhim.
In the tank here for the players.
There's going to be an Enlightened Strike from Michael, still trying to find that offensive angle as Oldhim.
The block with a shred here. We do see that Tunic activation finally activating Crown of Seeds. It's going to be a draw for Michael here. The Infect does connect via the shred, so there will be a Bloodrot Pox token on the side of Michael.
Just slow and steady here for both these players. Terra Sunder going to be the play from Michael.
Very nicely paired with something like Anathos, sort of a throwback to the early days of Terra Sunder.
Yeah, old school Terra Sundering, if you will.
I personally prefer the version where it also gave Frostbite, but somebody had to ban that card.
That one might have been a little bit too good, honestly. I think the world's a better place. These Oldhims are still out here having a good time. Come on.
All right,
You don't need Winner's Wail to party these days.
On hit, discard 2, I believe, for this Terra Sunder.
Absolutely, looking pretty good. And I think Michael really leveraging a few downturns from Francesco to go ahead and claw his way into this game. It looked like trouble for a while, but I think he's found a window. Potentially get some purchase into this matchup.
Francesco in the tank here of how to block this.
Francesco thinking carefully about the block here. Obviously, once it comes packing a bit of disruption, the equation gets a little bit more complicated. Going to be left with only 1 card in hand here, as Francesco does not have available multiple blocks.
Oh, there goes another pummel.
Yeah, critical threat to be taken.
I think we saw the other pummel pitched, by the way.
Going to pay for that Bloodrot Pox, preserve a little bit of life. And the turn passes back to Francesco. Just going to Arsenal, give the turn back to Michael. And usually you pass the turn back to an Oldhim with a full grip. Not all that afraid. Things are different in this matchup, though. Michael just has access to way more output, can be way more threatening.
Here's a Spinal Crush from Michael.
Yeah, this is a big one, both in number and in threat, potentially stopping that go again.
Again, this is one of those attacks that if we had more pummels in the deck and Tunic on 3, a good sort of Tunic pummel target. Spinal Crush is.
Just slow and steady instead.
Yeah, I mean, both players just taking it slow because they don't want to make any mistakes this late into the tournament. They've worked so hard to get here. The last thing you want to do is, trip up because you're playing too fast.
Looks like the turn is going to head back to Francesco now. Enlightened Strike, so a bit of aggression from the Uzuri player.
Do you think that's
a
go
big
again,
mode.
or yeah?
Oh, I think that's a big 7. I think that's the plan on this one. Michael happy to commit some cards to defense. Does have clean block here. Command and Conquer into Fate Foreseen, soaking up the full 7. That's going to be it from Francesco. Some pretty anemic looking turns over really the last 4 or 5 cycles of this game, not getting the output he was maybe looking for. And Michael Jaszczur slowly starting to claw his way back into this game.
Art of Fjendal. No activation, though, because Michael is on higher life. We do see a Command and Conquer. Is representing pummel to his opponent, unless his opponent is aware that Michael's only running 1 pummel. So maybe we'll see Francesco sort of tank on this as a result.
Yeah, this is a scary attack. This is like the classic pummel scenario, right? 1 resource floating, 1 resource ready to go, on Tunic, 1 card in hand. All of your pummel alarm bells should be going off right now. We know, though, only 1 pummel in this deck for Michael. Let's see how Francesco wants to navigate this scenario.
Francisco looking through the graveyard to check for how many pummels might be in there. I can only assume here. We'll see the 1, and yeah, I think that will get the sort of pummel juices flowing for Francisco.
Yeah, there's sort of some classic Fab player behaviors, and this is what I would term a classic for sure. Just taking a look, counting the pummels.
Oh, wow.
Understanding the threat. Yeah, and going to give the whole hand here. And what a win for Michael. What a huge get. Totally negates Francesco's turn with that threat. And now, the problem is once you do that as Francesco, you have to play as if that card in Arsenal is still pummel. That's the exact card that's left behind.
100%.
There's no choice.
Honestly, if I was Michael there, I probably would have sat on that for a bit before arsenaling. Looked a bit more disappointed. Michael, was quick to arsenal. Yeah. But Francisco playing around a pummel that doesn't exist is a huge win for Oldham here.
Oh, 100%.
Rousey Ancients.
Yeah, a bit more aggression here from Michael, getting that slightly wider turn.
This is, I think, Michael's deck is starting to play out how it was planned to.
Absolutely. And Oldham able to fade some of those tough turns. You got that big fridge, you got the manipulation of Crown of Seeds. You can just live through it. You'll find ways.
It's like Francisco, no blocks, but moves to sink below, does sink a card from hand. Ball Rousey Ancients with an Anothos. 4-6 here.
Yeah, some classic Guardian behavior. Just juicing up that Anothos. Getting that pitch zone going to have 6 power on this attack.
Started to settle into a very grindy game here. With now Oldham sort of being the beatdown, but Uzuri doing the mid-range things you talked about, splashing the defense reactions and trying to get efficient blocks here.
Yeah, how does Francesco pull out of this situation? What does it look like when he gets to turn the corner? Is it all about finding something disruptive like a shakedown? Is it about just defend, and, shifting to a fatigue plan? What is the game plan if you're in his seat?
Yeah, I think we know that there's one more pummel left in the deck. Of course, one was pitched. One above the one that was pitched. And due to that, potentially something like a swap and shakedown Tunic pummel could be a huge pivot turn for Francisco. I'm going to be honest with you, Brian. Keeping 4 cards in hand or 5 cards in hand and then playing out 2 of those cards is not going to do it, though.
No, I agree with you. I think we're just seeing a startling amount of inefficiency right now from Francesco's deck. It's kind of betrayed him in this scenario. And, I see what the configuration is going for. We saw these spreading plagues and ways to really punish these Oldhams for wide blocks, but unfortunately the threat hasn't really been generated thus far to force that kind of action. And here is a shakedown. This is certainly a threatening card, and it is looking to get some level of commitment from Michael. Certainly going to give it a read. Get yourself familiar with that one. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of it as time goes on.
Definitely the least scary version of Shakedown, though, not being swapped in, no pummel threat.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be a very face-up block. Looks like a defense reaction coming out from Michael here with the equipment block, the 0 for 4 in the defense reaction step, and there is the sink below. Nice. Will he choose to sink from hand? Yes, he will.
Perfectly blocked for Michael, only committing one card. Let's see what the answer back is. Do we have a large attack to serve Francesco's way?
So, Brian, you play a lot of Azzurri. Do you find yourself saving your shakedowns for swap-ins and pummels, or do you run them out in sort of those two-card hands? Do you think you may have put that shakedown arsenal? Or
the most important thing, I think, when playing Azzurri is there's no rules. Like, you just have to be flexible. You have to ask what the situation demands. In Francesco's case right there, what do I think of the decision? Well, I don't see how that gets you back in the game. I understand the fear of just passing the turn. But honestly, I think if you just Arsenal there, this turn might look exactly the same. There may be no difference in what Michael's offering you here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's how it would have played out. Turns out Michael does have the Terror Sunder with Anothos, which we've seen already is a devastating sort of sequence of cards for Francesco. Not having access to much armor or a fridge to deal with that, and does not seem to be drawing the defense reactions sort of at the correct time or have them saved up.
Here's a Shred coming down to do a little blocking duty.
Yeah, Terra Sunder definitely the MVP of this match so far.
100%.
I think, debatably Pulverized was the MVP for Francesco before it was taken away.
Yeah, unfortunately answered that one. And this time Francesco is just going to go ahead, Arsenal and pass. But now, at a Precurious 4, no real threat on Michael's life total. Going to be hard for Francesco to find some purchase here.
Michael really just needs to go wide or find some dominate. We see Glacial Footsteps in hand. I'm not sure if there are any fuse targets, but I think Macho Grande is most likely in the list. It's really not too hard for Oldhim decks to close out these sort of board states where Oldhim is so far ahead in life and has the range to just, whatever Azzurri does, unless it's going to disrupt the turn, you can just say take it, and then you can either come in with a very large go wide attack, some sort of evasion, etc.
Looks like Frailty Token being delivered here by that trap. So a nice block, for sure, but there is follow-up here. And the follow-up is just Anothos, but Anothos for 6. It's a scary card.
Yeah, 13 damage turn is not too bad out of Oldhim. I think that's one of the more powerful turns that Oldhim can do.
100%. Francesco just thinking about the blocks here. Certainly going to have to give.
Can't imagine. Yep, so we are going to block with 2 cards.
Yep. Clean 5 block, cut down to size,
Yeah.
put the defense.
Down to 3, I don't think there was a decision for the sort of quantity of cards that was committed to block, but potentially was weighing up what should be placed in Arsenal.
Yeah, and again, just another turn pass back, no offense whatsoever from Francesco, and it feels like maybe we're witnessing a bit of a death spiral right now. Francesco just being pressured on every single turn.
There it is.
Here comes Macho Grande with Dominate. Does Francesco have an answer? Is there any way out of this scenario?
Checks the Arsenal.
Gonna need something, some sort of miracle delivered from on high to get out of this spot. Does have Tunic. Vambrace potentially available for defense. Vambrace not the strongest defensive option, quite frankly.
So 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, that's
Yep,
exact
that's a hand.
season. That's going to get the
I was
handshake, and Michael Jaszczur going to go ahead and win this match. And I got to tell you, Brendan,